There is a moment, usually quiet, almost forgettable, where you realize something is wrong with how intelligence has been sold to you, because you've spent your life believing that brilliance belongs to a select few, that some people were simply born closer to the fire while you were handed a candle and told to be grateful. And yet you keep noticing something unsettling, something that doesn't fit the story, something that crawls into your awareness late at night when the noise dies down, the realization that the people who control rooms, who bend outcomes, who seem untouchable under pressure, are not always the smartest by any academic measure, but they move as if the world responds to them differently, as if reality itself leans in to listen when they think. You've carried this longer than you admit, and the reason it bothers you is because deep down you can feel it. The sense that intelligence as you were taught is incomplete, sanitized, declawed, made safe for classrooms and tests and applause, while the real intelligence and the kind that reshapes fate has been quietly locked away, whispered about, banned not because it doesn't work, but because it works too well on those who learn how to use it. This is not about learning faster or memorizing more or proving you're gifted, because that game was never designed for you to win. It was designed to keep you chasing validation while others learned how to think in ways that never needed permission. And once you see that, once the illusion cracks, there is no going back, because this is the point of no return. The moment where you either cling to the comfort of what you were told or you step into something colder, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. This is the moment your life begins to make sense. From the time you were young, intelligence was framed as something visible: grades, praise, speed, the ability to answer quickly, to speak confidently, to be recognized as bright. And you were taught, subtly and repeatedly, that if you struggled, if you hesitated, if you observed more than you spoke, then something must be missing in you, some spark you were never given. But that story was never neutral. It trained you to equate intelligence with exposure, with performance, with being seen, while quietly discouraging the kind of thinking that thrives in silence, the kind that doesn't rush to conclusions, the kind that studies patterns instead of collecting facts, the kind that waits while others reveal themselves. You're not broken. You were never taught another way, because the most dangerous minds in history were not those who impressed crowds with brilliance. They were the ones who understood something far more unsettling: that intelligence is not about knowing more, but about positioning your mind so that others unknowingly do the work for you, revealing their intentions, their weaknesses, their fears, simply by how they react to your restraint. This is where the forbidden part begins. The dark brain hack that changes everything is not a trick, not a shortcut, not a technique you deploy outwardly. It is an internal reorientation, a decision to stop thinking like a participant and start thinking like an observer, a strategist, someone who understands that the mind becomes powerful not when it fills itself with information, but when it learns what to withhold. You were taught to think forward, to respond, to engage, to explain, to prove. But the untouchable mind thinks laterally and vertically. It watches cause and effect unfold in real time. It notices how people collapse under silence, how authority leaks when someone is not challenged, how truth often surfaces not under interrogation, but under pressure created by calm presence. This kind of intelligence feels wrong at first because it violates everything you were praised for. It asks you to slow down when others speed up, to say less when others talk more, to resist the urge to be understood, even when your nervous system begs for clarity and reassurance. You survive things you still don't have words for. And that survival taught you to read rooms, to feel shifts in tone, to sense danger before it speaks, which means you already carry the raw material for this way of thinking, even if no one ever named it for you. Here is the first psychological shift, and it is subtle, but once it happens, everything rearranges itself around it. You stop asking, "What should I think?" And you start asking, "What is being revealed right now that no one notices?" This is where intelligence stops being about answers and becomes about leverage. Most people burn their mental energy trying to appear smart, reacting quickly, offering opinions, filling space because they believe intelligence is proven through output. But the untouchable mind understands that every reaction leaks information. Every explanation narrows possibility. Every attempt to be seen hands control to the one watching. So instead of reacting, you begin to delay. Instead of explaining, you begin to observe. Instead of competing, you begin to let others expose themselves. This delay is not passivity, it is pressure because silence is not empty. It is an unspoken question hanging in the air, forcing others to resolve the tension you created by not resolving it for them. Watch what happens when you do not rush to answer. Watch how people begin to talk more than they intended, how they clarify, justify, soften, contradict themselves, revealing motivations they would have hidden if you had responded too quickly. This is the banned hack, the ability to let your mind stay open long enough for reality to show you its seams. You are not imagining this. When you stop performing intelligence, when you stop signaling it, something shifts in how others perceive you, because now they cannot place you, cannot predict you, cannot extract reassurance from your behavior, and uncertainty, handled calmly, is one of the most powerful cognitive positions a human can occupy. You are no longer thinking to impress, you are thinking to understand, and understanding is the precursor to control. This is why those who master this are often underestimated at first, dismissed as quiet, reserved, even slow, until suddenly they are the ones everyone defers to, not because they demanded authority, but because they seem to see further down the road than anyone else. Here is where the hidden thread appears, because once you begin thinking this way, you will notice something uncomfortable, that many systems around you depend on people not thinking like this, depend on constant reaction, constant explanation, constant emotional discharge, because a reactive mind is predictable, and a predictable mind is easy to steer. When you pause, when you withhold, when you stop offering your inner world for free, you disrupt that system, and disruption always attracts resistance. Subtle at first, then sharper. People will call you distant, cold, arrogant, difficult to read, and this is where most abandon the path, rushing back into explanation to reclaim approval. But that is the trap, because the moment you defend your mind, you give away its position. The untouchable mind accepts misunderstanding as the cost of freedom. It understands that being fully understood by everyone is not safety, it is exposure. This is not about manipulation for its own sake. It is about reclaiming sovereignty over your attention, your reactions, your inner tempo, because the world will always try to pull you into its rhythm, its urgency, its noise, and the one who controls the rhythm controls the outcome. You're allowed to want more clarity, more depth, more power over how your mind moves through pressure, through conflict, through uncertainty. This is not about becoming cruel, but about becoming precise, because precision is what allows you to move through chaos without being consumed by it. Once you adopt this way of thinking, you will feel the shift internally first, a strange calm where there used to be urgency, a widening gap between stimulus and response, and in that gap, something extraordinary happens. Your intelligence stops being reactive and becomes architectural, shaping situations instead of being shaped by them. And this is only the beginning. Now the deeper truth surfaces, the one most people never reach because it requires something rarer than intelligence. The willingness to sit with discomfort without anesthetizing it. Because once you stop reacting, once you stop performing, you begin to notice a pattern that changes how you see every so-called genius you were taught to admire, that their advantage was never raw intellect. It was cognitive positioning, the ability to step outside the emotional current and let others drown in it while they remain dry. This is where you begin to recognize how often you were pulled into urgency that wasn't yours, debates you didn't need to win, explanations you didn't know. How much of your mental energy was spent proving yourself to people who were never equipped to evaluate you fairly in the first place? And here is the quiet invitation, not spoken aloud but felt, the invitation to stop spending your mind like loose change. So if you're listening to this and something in you tightens, something recognizes itself, it's okay to feel this, because this recognition is not comfortable. It strips away excuses. It removes the illusion that your limits were imposed from the outside and replaces it with something heavier. responsibility for how you aim your attention. You may already be noticing how often the smartest move is not to add a thought, but to remove one, how subtraction sharpens perception, how clarity emerges not when the mind is busy, but when it is still enough to see patterns instead of noise. And if you're honest with yourself, you've felt this before. Moments where you said less and people leaned in more. Moments where you waited and the truth revealed itself without effort. Moments where restraint made you feel strangely powerful. If this resonates, sit with it, reflect on it, let it echo because awareness deepens when you don't rush past it. And if you choose to stay here, to explore this way of thinking further, you already know what to do, not because someone told you, but because your mind is starting to recognize its own leverage. There are small moments, almost invisible, where this way of thinking begins to rewire you, micro shifts that feel insignificant until you look back and realize nothing is the same. You notice how your breath slows when tension enters a room, how instead of rushing to fill silence, you allow it to stretch, how your body no longer flinches at confrontation because you are no longer defending an image, you are observing a process. You begin to sense how others speed up when you slow down, how they reveal urgency when you remain composed, how their need for resolution becomes your informational advantage. This is not emotional numbness. It is emotional literacy, the ability to feel without being hijacked, to register without reacting, to let sensations pass through you without dictating your behavior. You're allowed to want more than surface-level thinking. You start to see how often people mistake intensity for intelligence, volume for certainty, confidence for competence, and how easily crowds follow whoever sounds most sure, not whoever sees most clearly. And quietly, almost without announcing itself, a new self-trust forms, not the loud kind that needs affirmation, but the grounded kind that comes from knowing you can wait, you can watch, you can decide later. And later is often where power lives. These moments accumulate, like weight added gradually, until one day you realize your mind no longer rushes to conclusions. It hovers, surveys, maps terrain before moving, and that alone puts you ahead of most people, not because you're smarter, but because you're not leaking yourself into every stimulus that passes by. You walk into a room and you feel it immediately. The subtle hum of attention, the unspoken hierarchy forming itself before a word is spoken. And instead of trying to climb it, you step just outside of it, observing who talks first, who interrupts, who seeks validation through laughter, who stays quiet out of fear, and who stays quiet out of control. You feel your feet on the ground, your posture relaxed, your gaze steady, and you notice how others glance toward you, trying to read you, trying to place you, and failing. You listen more than you speak, not because you have nothing to say, but because every word you don't say sharpens the ones you eventually choose. You notice how questions land heavier than statements, how a simple pause makes others over-explain, how neutrality unsettles those who rely on emotional hooks to feel powerful. You feel your own mind working differently now, less frantic, more spacious, as if time itself has slowed just enough for you to step between moments and choose your position deliberately. This is the lived experience of the untouchable mind, not dramatic, not flashy, but deeply unsettling to those who depend on predictability to maintain control. And in these moments, you realize something quietly profound. You were never lacking intelligence. You were just spending it in the wrong currency. But this is not the end of the path. It is the edge of a deeper descent. Because as you become harder to read, more composed under pressure, more selective with your reactions, a new tension emerges, the tension between visibility and influence. You will sense it, the pull to reveal yourself, to explain your process, to reassure others that you are not a threat, and resisting that pull is where this practice becomes truly difficult. Because the more disciplined your mind becomes, the more others project onto it. Assumptions, fears, narratives that have nothing to do with you, and everything to do with their need for certainty. This is where curiosity layers remain open, questions you don't answer yet, doors you don't open, silence you allow to stand, not as avoidance but as structure. Something is forming beneath the surface now, a reputation not built on brilliance, but on presence, not on noise but on restraint. And once that takes hold, The dynamics around you begin to shift in ways you cannot fully predict, but you can feel them approaching. You're not imagining this. The next phase demands even more precision because awareness without integration becomes arrogance, and power without grounding becomes self-destruction. And navigating that line is where many falter. But if you've made it this far, if you're still here, still listening, still feeling that quiet alignment inside, then you're ready to move forward into the phase where this way of thinking stops being internal and starts shaping outcomes. There is a moment when the rhythm changes, when the calm you've built starts to feel heavier, denser, like standing at the edge of something vast and quiet, because now you're no longer just thinking differently, you're being felt differently, and that is where tension sharpens. You begin to notice how people hesitate before speaking around you, how conversations subtly adjust their tone, how jokes soften, how assumptions are tested twice before being voiced, and this is not because you asserted dominance, but because your mind no longer rushes to meet others where they stand. This pause you've cultivated creates gravity, and gravity changes trajectories. You feel it in conflict most clearly, when others escalate emotionally and you don't follow, when they search your face for reaction and find none, when their certainty begins to wobble under your stillness. Because emotional intensity without a mirror collapses inward. This is where most people panic because they were taught that silence is weakness. That response equals strength. But you now understand the reversal. That restraint is what exposes instability. That composure under pressure is a form of intelligence that cannot be faked. You're not broken. You were never taught another way. And now that you are thinking this way, you can feel how dangerous it would be to misuse it, how easy it would be to let ego step in, to enjoy the imbalance too much, to forget that this clarity is a tool, not an identity. This is the rising suspense, the point where power tests the one who holds it, asking whether you will integrate it quietly or let it hollow you out. This is where the most subtle choice appears, barely noticeable unless you're paying attention. The choice to keep refining this way of thinking instead of letting it stagnate. Because the untouchable mind is not static, it sharpens through reflection, through disciplined awareness, through continuously asking not how do I win, but what is actually happening beneath the surface right now. You may find yourself returning to these ideas, replaying moments from your day, noticing where you reacted too quickly, where you spoke when silence would have taught you more, where you felt the old urge to explain rise up and gently chose not to follow it. This is not perfection, it is calibration. And if you stay with this practice, if you let it evolve naturally instead of forcing it, you will begin to notice something almost eerie, that situations start resolving themselves before you intervene, that people adjust without being told, that outcomes tilt in your favor not because you pushed them, but because you positioned yourself correctly within them. You don't need to announce this shift. Those who are ready will feel it. Those who aren't will never understand it, and that's not your burden to carry. Here is the final warning, the one most never hear until it's too late. Every predator has a predator, and the moment you believe yourself immune, the moment you stop observing yourself with the same precision you apply to others, is the moment you become readable again. Power that is not examined turns inward and corrodes. So you move quietly, you stay curious, you let your mind remain flexible, never rigid, never trapped in a role, always aware that true intelligence is not domination, but navigation, not control, but timing. And as you stand there, no longer chasing brilliance, no longer measuring yourself against gifted labels or borrowed standards, you realize the most dangerous thought you can have is also the most liberating. You were never behind, you were just early. Click on the screen to watch the next video on how this knowledge changes what happens next, what most people never realize after this moment, and what you will start seeing differently from now on.